Hello, I'm Kristen Dailey, the Executive Director of Global Washington, and I'm joined here today with Hilary Haddigan, who's the Chief of Mission Effectiveness at Heifer International. Hilary's worked with Heifer since October 1999, it's quite a long time, and as the Chief Mission Effectiveness, she leads the development of the organizational strategy, as well as cross-cutting initiatives to advance the change and objectives of the organization. Prior to Heifer, Hilary worked at Christian Aid in the UK and volunteer mission movement in Zimbabwe. And she's been a teacher in the northwest of England, which is her homeland. So thank you for joining us today. We're happy to have you here in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just start the conversation by you telling us a little bit more about Heifer and tell us about your mission and your work.
Okay. So Heifer is Heifer International. We are a 75-year-old international development organisation. We have a basic model of providing livestock and community development training to help farmers feed their families and then also make some income. Our mission is to end hunger and poverty and care for the earth. And we've adapted that model over the years, but that's the core mission and that's not changed.
Mm. And that's quite a bold mission, just to end poverty and hunger. It reminds me of the Sustainable Development Goals. Those are the broad goals as well. No hunger, no poverty.
Yeah, so they caught up with us.
They did, exactly. They looked around and said, other organizations have this goal.
Yeah.
That's great. That's good alignment. And tell us a little bit more about your role there at Heifer.
My job is Chief of Mission Effectiveness. So I work with a team of people who support the program teams in country who are doing the work on the ground to help design effective programs and then monitor and evaluate that work and bring forward our learning and information so that we can use it to report back to donors and to help inform the organisation's strategy. So I lead that team and we're really trying to help donors and the public understand what we're accomplishing and to learn from it so that we can continuously improve our practice. And we're also beginning to bring lessons from the field forward so that we can share it more broadly and kind of influence the development sector with what we're learning.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, if you've been at this for 75 years, you've probably seen so many pieces of the problem and the solution, and hunger and poverty are not new. So what is your unique approach to these topics, if you can expand on what you've already said?
So when we think about kind of 2008, 2009 and the economic crisis, what we saw then, all of us saw, was that the number of people living in extreme poverty went up again. So it was going down, 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 and then suddenly it sprang back up to over 1 billion. And we've started to ask ourselves what helps people to be resilient. And we'd had a program in East Africa, the East Africa Dairy Development Program, which was a partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where we had built into our program work an intentional connection to markets for farmers and really built out the dairy value chain in East Africa. And so we used that model to look at the rest of our program work and try to build out connecting farmers to markets. There's a population growth around the world. There is increasing need for protein. So meat, animal source food is going to be in demand. And we know that the smallholder farmers play a large role in providing food for the population and will so in the future. So we believe there's a real role for smallholder farmers to be profitable if they're connected to markets. So we started to integrate that into our program work. And then people have said to us, well, ending hunger and poverty is a very lofty goal. What does that really look like? How do you measure that? And so we started to look at what does it mean in this community we're working in here in East Africa or in Nepal or wherever we're working. And so we codified a way of measuring what is a living income. So that, meaning people have enough money for a dignified life, food for their family, education, health, the ability to withstand shocks and unexpected,
That's localized in each context?
in each context. And so now all of our projects that are designed have what we call a living income benchmark, to say that's what we're heading for, that's the target, how is this project contributing to that, and what is the gap between the current income and living income, so that we can help move farmers towards that living income and a dignified livelihood. So that's led to a lot of adaptation in our programme to really achieve that zero poverty and ending hunger. So
did Heifer start just with food security and hunger and then add economic development on? Or were they together always?
I think always together. So the initial stimulus was to help farmers have food for their own families. So I'll go into a little background.
Yeah,
so
do.
Our founding was in 1944, but it was the idea for it was born in 1939. Our founder was called Dan West. He was a conscientious objector who was serving in Spain during the Spanish Civil War. He was a farmer, but he was distributing food aid in the form of powdered milk to families in Spain. And he looked around and the fields were green, and he said, this is crazy. They could have cows, and we're giving them powdered food. They could be producing their own food, and here we are. And so he came back with that idea, and the phrase we've coined is not a cup but a cow. And so the first shipment of cows went from being collected by 14 families in the Midwest and shipped to Puerto Rico in 1944. So it was always about food for the family first, but then the ability to sell the excess and have income. So that's always been there. And more recently we've emphasised the economic development, because without that you're not going to have a long-term sustainable change in people's livelihoods, you know. So.
Can you talk a little more about that? So you're talking about working with smallholder farmers, so people with very small plots of land for agriculture, for animal husbandry, and like you said, they can grow enough food for their family perhaps, or have a cow. How do you go from that to a farmer who can have more sustainable income and link them to the market? I mean, I don't imagine these smallholder farmers would be producing on a scale for export, but how do you create that access to market?
So it varies in every context, of course, but so I'll go through how the model develops. So we start by working with community groups. We'll work with groups of 20, 30 farmers together to build we've got what we call a values-based holistic community development model. Long phrase, but it's a community development model that really supports kind of personal transformation first, and then people reaching out, forming networks across their community, so that they've got a very solid base of peers that they're working with, essentially. And that's a very supportive group. And to make that happen, we include things like savings and loans funds and technical training, nutrition training, literacy training. So it's a multifaceted model. And that sets farmers up into a kind of a supportive network. And so they may start out with 1 or 2 goats or 1 cow, etc. And that traditionally that's where they've been. What we've now built in is looking at, okay, what is the demand in the local economy or the national economy that relates to this thing that they're producing. So if it's goats that they're producing, what is the demand for goats? So for example, in Nepal, the government of Nepal have a policy that they want to minimise the importation of goats and try to be able to produce locally. So we've developed a goat value chain project in support of helping minimise the import of goats from India. So it's an import substitution programme. And we've worked with farmers to look at what their farm capacity is for increasing the number of goats that they can own. And we've started to look at what it takes to improve the quality of the meat and train them in the different timings of when they sell. So if they sell at festival times, they might get a low price because there's so much being sold. If they can hold the goat longer, then it might improve their income. If they sell at a certain weight, they'll get a certain price. If they keep the goat longer, they're having to feed it for longer, but they might not get the same, they might not get the value back. So selling at a critical, so that we started to train in more kind of farm business management skills,
business management.
so that they can begin to see a bigger scale for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then we organise the self-help groups into cooperatives, and the co-ops are the ones that are selling into the market. And the co-ops then begin to develop their own business plan that requires a quota of goats, and so they go back to the farmers. So it's an iterative process of this planning, and so gradually the farmers begin to increase their scale, and so supported by co-ops, supported by financial services, and they have a much bigger capacity than than you would have imagined.
Well, and with your programs, it was having that combined with savings, because I imagine a farmer intuitively knows that if they sell their goat during festival, they understand this, but not having savings, they have to sell the goat. So if you can say this is why the savings will help, and educate people on that, so it elevates what they intuitively know.
Financing is a critical issue for farmers, and it is in every country in the world. It's not unique to where we work. But the farmers that we work with are not eligible for loans, etc., because they've not got an asset base that can serve as a guarantee, so they're high risk. So the savings and loans funds, one of our program directors says that if the savings and loan fund works in a community, it's an indicator that that community is going to be successful. If they can't get that to work, then they're not ready to take on the project. And it's one of the first things that they start, even if they're only putting the equivalent of 1 cent in, they're putting something in every week, and they're taking loans from it after a certain period of time. And so then they have access to cash that they can start to do things, and then they start to build a practice of credit. Because Heifer's working with these community groups, other financial service providers are willing to come in and take a risk, because they know that Heifer's built this trusting base, so then they can start to get small loans from other places.
Once it becomes a co-op and becomes larger and larger.
Yeah, and the co-ops are operating financial services too. So
that's great.
Yeah, so gradually there's the access to cash to be able to do more in their own farming system, so they can buy tools or invest in some kind of processing unit, and as a cooperative they can build out a bigger venture. So gradually it grows. So
that's great. That's a really strong model for sustainability. So you've been around 75 years.
Not me.
And Heifer. Heifer's been around 75 years. What has the organization learned over that? What is different today than it was when it first started?
Very different.
Yeah.
So there's some things that are the same, and I think it's important to say that. So I told you the founding story. We were started by a group of people who voluntarily brought forward their own assets to share with other people, and sent them overseas. So we are still made up of people who voluntarily share funds to be able to support people in another part of the world who've got very similar hopes and desires. So that has never changed. We don't ship livestock anymore. We know that there's livestock available locally, and shipping isn't the best thing for the livestock, and with it being available locally, strong genetic material available, and that buying locally builds the economy. So that's one thing that we don't do anymore. In some places we don't even buy livestock. If a lot of people, so take goats for example, farmers may have their own goats, but they may not be strong genetic material. They may be indigenous goats that aren't good for meat production. But if we provide one boar and can breed goats, then we don't have to provide everybody with a goat. We can provide just a few bucks and gradually improve the genetic material. So we're finding different ways around the program that keep the core the same, but build greater efficiencies and help to build the local economy as well. So, so things like that have changed. We've kind of graduated through the whole from basic sharing of livestock and assets to incorporating community development, to incorporating an awareness and adaptation for gender needs, and incorporating environmental concerns. And then most recently the addition of the market-based connections and building out farmer enterprises, investment financing, and partnering with other actors in the value chain and corporate partners. So we've adapted a lot along the way.
Right. Well, that's what's made you so successful over the years.
Yeah,
That's wonderful.
I think so.
So, I mean, thinking about these issues, fundamentally, as you said, eliminating extreme poverty, looking at hunger, you know, it's what Global Washington looks at and calls, you know, the wicked problems of our days. That these are tangled and thorny problems. So what keeps you optimistic in your work day to day, and that you've been doing this work for a long time now too yourself?
Yeah.
So what gives you hope? Are you hopeful?
Yes. What gives me hope is people. So I'm a teacher by my trade. My first job was teaching, and I taught in Zimbabwe in a very rural area, and recognise very quickly the resourcefulness that people have. So people have a lot within them that if they have the opportunity and the outside resources and enabling environment, they can achieve a lot for themselves. And that is what gives me hope. A lot of issues that are affecting hunger and poverty are complex, and as you say, they're wicked problems. And there are multiple policies and regulatory environments and actors that add to the complexity in the problems. Heifer's model is in keeping with my own belief system, that if people believe in themselves and are empowered, they will find their way through it. And that it's by, every corporation and every policy group and every government is made up of people. So people reaching out to people and engaging in real dialogue is what's going to make change happen in the world, and that's what Heifer is supporting.
That's great. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing some time with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for watching. If you want to learn more about Heifer International and other organizations, you can go to globalwa.org, and thanks for watching.